Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca,
And I'm Landon.
and we have a very special guest on today. We have the wonderful Autumn on with us. How are you today, Autumn?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, we're so excited to have you with us. Now, we always kind of give a little background about our guests or how we kind of came across them. This was a little more unusual, wouldn't you say, Landon?
Yeah, definitely. We heard from her after we'd done our Tim Ballard episode and some of the things that had come out, and she wrote us an email kind of telling us her background, and we were just awed as we read it
Yeah.
and said we've got to contact her and get her on the show. And so obviously, she's here as an avatar. And we'll explain that a little bit just because of the nature of these. It's a very personal story, and so as a result, we're keeping her identity. We didn't want to have her identity known, but she is going by a pseudonym. But we want to welcome her because this is a really interesting story.
Yeah, it's extremely important. And as Landon said, Autumn reached out to us via email, sort of talking about how the things that we had been discussing with the grooming process that we are all kind of hearing about for some for the first time, really thinking about it in what Tim's doing to different women, Tim Ballard. And I think a lot of us have questions. Well, how does that even happen? How is somebody groomed? What does that feel like? What does that result in? And there's kind of a spotlight being shown on that right now. And so Autumn's letter emailed to us had some really interesting information that we thought this kind of takes you through the process from start to finish of how this can happen. And so we're just going to let Autumn introduce herself and we'll just start the conversation. But I guarantee that this is going to be really enlightening and really interesting to everyone.
Well, thank you for having me on. I've struggled for a while wondering if I should even share this story because it's such a sensitive topic. But just listening to your podcast and listening to yet another story come out into the public about people that just use the church and use the beliefs to abuse other people, it really just hit home. And a lot of the things that we're hearing this Tim Ballard story parallel some of my experience, my own personal experiences. I don't know Tim Ballard. Didn't have any interaction with him, but I had some similar things happen to me a couple decades ago. And it's just fascinating to me that we keep seeing these things happen over and over in the news. And I think there's a tendency to feel like these things they're outliers. These are just bad actors. This couldn't happen to me. This couldn't happen to one of my children. This couldn't happen to someone I know, one of my friends. And the truth of it is, I think that these things are happening in close quarters, in on more personal levels within families and individuals. And what we're seeing in the news is just a big, large example of something that's happening on a smaller scale. So I don't know. I just felt like it was maybe important or time to share.
No, we're really, really glad that you reached out because you're right. You touched on it. People are saying, how does this happen? How were these women groomed? Were they groomed by Tim Ballard? Or were they groomed by a church or an institution where this process started, decades ago before they even met Tim? And I think that's kind of what we're all grappling with right now. How does somebody become conditioned to be, to get involved in a situation like this without even really realizing it? And when you kind of detailed your experience that you're going to tell us about tonight in the email that you sent us, both Landon and I thought this is a really good example, a very straightforward way to sort of detail that process and how it happens, just step by step, very simplistically. Is that how you kind of felt, Landon, when you read the email? We were both very impressed by it.
Yeah, Autumn outlined it very well and just walked us through the steps of what happened with her situation. And it was just going, oh my gosh, I can completely understand how this happened. And, it didn't, it was pretty obvious when we saw the allegations against Tim Ballard and the women and what they were coming out with, that all of them but one, I think, were LDS. So that made us start to think, is it Tim Ballard who was grooming the women, or was it the church that was grooming the women, in that they'd set the stage or the conditions to which they followed that led them down that path? And when we did our episode on Joseph Smith, Joseph 2.0, we started seeing very many similarities. So I know this is a sensitive subject with a lot of people, and there'll be a lot of comments on both sides, but I think the grooming, we can't just look at Tim Ballard and say he did all the grooming. I think there was the stage was set prior to that, and Autumn's story kind of emphasized that as we read it. So why don't you tell us, Autumn, a little bit about your story and background, and how, what happened with you in this situation?
If you don't mind, I'd like to briefly just touch on, I have a lot of friends and family that are active in the church, and I want to make sure that that they know that none of these things that I'm sharing today are an attack on them or attack on their beliefs. That for me, the best part of the church, the best things that happen in the church happen on a local and personal level. And there are many people that are very dear to me, and are some of the best people in the world that I think have loved me unconditionally, no matter where I was in the church. It just turns out that most of those people are people that are able to live it in a more nuanced way. But by the same token, some of the most awful things I've witnessed in the church also happen on a very local and personal level. And it tends to be that those things are motivated by some more fundamentalist beliefs. And I think that that's what we're going to touch on tonight, is there are still teachings out there, even though you may not think that they're mainstream right now. They were mainstream at a time, and they still influence the culture and the people in the church in a way that I think can accurately be described as grooming.
100%. Yeah, we absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, and I would back that same thing, that there are some wonderful people in the church. My entire family's in, people I love, and so yeah, it's not an attack on them, but we also have to be careful, because what we're taught can sometimes allow things to go on that we think are good or wholesome, and they're in reality not, because we're too close, or we're following the advice of what we were taught, and not stepping back and looking and saying, is this right or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know. Let's see where to start. Gosh, it's so much stuff, and it's so long ago. So I guess a really important part of my story is that I'm a convert to the church. So I was not raised in the culture. I really knew nothing at all about the church until I was a teenager. And I was baptized as a young adult. So when I came in, when I was first married, I was married very young, not very long after I was baptized. And I'm still learning the culture and the vernacular and the signaling that you do in the church. I wasn't quite there yet. I don't think I was fluid in the language of the church. So there's a lot of things that I think happened to me that maybe wouldn't happen to someone who was a little more knowledgeable about it. But I think it kind of helped make me a perfect victim for what happened. But I met a guy in the church who ended up being my husband. And when I first met him, he was very, very active, a very integral part of the young adult ward that I went to. And when I was first baptized, I was all in. Like I couldn't get the information fast enough. Like I read every book I could get my hands on, books on tape, just everything. I consumed it voraciously. So it was actually kind of hard to find someone who was at that level to date. Most of the people I had been dating were not, were more normal, because I was not in a normal state, I don't think. But this guy that I started dating, he was there. He was right there with me, and he was almost even more so. Like, he took everything that I did to an extra level. And to me, that seemed like signaling in the church that he's very righteous. He had a calling in the church. He was serving in the bishopric. He was very kind to people. He had this way of including people that were sort of on the fringes and social groups. And I really loved that about him. I thought that was just so kind and Christ-like. He only listened to church music. Just he did all the things I was doing, but he was doing them extra, like one step more. He was going to the temple. He had his endowments out, and he would go to the temple weekly, sometimes multiple times a week. He did all the things, right, that we in the church see as signals that this person is safe, this person is good, this person, and in my mind, this person was an authority in a way that he knew more than I did, and I was still new and I was still learning. So I don't even know where to go.
I was going to say that does sound familiar when you sort of compare it to the Tim Ballard situation. All the women said he knew more than I did. He was an authority figure to me, and you certainly give up a portion, if not a huge portion, of your power when you're with someone like that, because you trust them. There's no reason not to. Overtly, they look like they do know, and they have your best interest in heart. It's only till later hindsight, maybe, that you start going, okay, something was not right here. So that part of your story was very intriguing to me. I can see why you would think that this was the perfect guy. Yeah. He sounds absolutely perfect.
Yeah. He also had a story, like a conversion story, that was very dramatic in nature that he shared. And it was just about, like he admitted that in his high school years, he hadn't been active. He hadn't been doing the things he should be doing. And he'd had this experience where he went out with some friends one night and just felt the power of Satan upon him. Like, the way he described it was similar to what you would read in the Alma the Younger story in the Book of Mormon, where he kind of felt the weight of all the evil around him, and it really sort of woke him up in a very quick and instant way, and he came out of that experience converted and wanting to do all the right things. And it sure seemed to me that he had been doing that. So his past didn't, I never asked him about his past or any details. I fully believed in the atonement. If you repent in it, then it's all washed away, and there's no need to talk about it, no need to know it, nothing. So that didn't bother me at the time. And I think in hindsight, I can see where that might have been some good information to have.
Was your family happy that you were dating this young man? I mean, he sounds perfect. Like, any family would be really happy to have, a daughter bring this person home.
My family are very supportive. They were mixed in their feelings about me joining the church. That took a little while for them to get used to, but once I was in the church, they were very supportive. So I don't know if they had other inklings that they just didn't share, or but it sure seemed like he fit in pretty well. So we got married, and it was pretty instant. Well, I shouldn't even say pretty instantaneous. It was instantaneous. Like, even our wedding night was not like, I saw another side to him that I actually just never seen before. All of a sudden, it was very controlling. It was very verbally and emotionally abusive, like, right away. I think how I put it to you guys in the email was that it seems like before we were married, he was proving his righteousness or maybe spiritual superiority through orthopraxy, like showing what he was doing. But after the marriage, he was maintaining that authority or that appearance through orthodoxy, through forcing everything to be a certain way and interpreting it very, very literally.
And I
So
assume you were married in the temple and you had taken the oaths, to follow your husband and those words.
yes, yes, and that comes into play, a little later in our marriage, but it was yes, specifically the covenant to follow my husband as my husband follows God, came to be sort of his mantra, the thing that he really held over my head later on as things progressed. And I do remember being in the temple and having that covenant explained. And in my mind, I thought that was an out, that you follow your husband as your husband follows God. So I thought, okay, well, then you have an out. You only have to follow him as long as he's following God. And if he's not following God, then you don't have to. But no one ever, you don't get to ask questions in the temple. You don't even really get to go have that explained to you later, what that really means. You're left to interpret it the way that you think, but if you're someone who, especially a woman, you always have someone who's an authority over you. Always, always, always. There's someone who has more authority over you than you. And if someone with the authority or perceived authority says, no, that's not what that means, then guess whose definition wins? So,
No.
I thought in the moment, okay, that sounds fine to me. I have an out. I only have to follow someone if they're following God. That sounds great. But later on, it became, no, what that means is you follow me no matter what. And if I'm following God, great. We'll both make it. And if I'm not following God, then, and I lead you astray, you're indemnified. You're still going to make it. I'm the one that's going to take the heat for that. And that's a very, very different and dangerous interpretation, because it leads you to start doing things that go against your own conscience just because someone else is telling you to do it.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think our viewers probably recognize that Autumn would have gone through the temple the same as myself, where that was the covenant, and you don't have any prior knowledge of it. You go in and all of a sudden you hear, follow your husband follows God. You don't really know what that means. They have since changed that. And I can only guess it's because they've heard of so many scenarios like this where that kind of dynamic and that power relationship is abused. And so they have made a change to that covenant so that each person now is supposedly having a direct relationship and a direct, responsibility for their own covenant and relationship with God. But this is certainly a very real thing in a lot of marriages. Up until do you remember, Landon, when that was changed? It's recently.
Yeah,
it is. I would say 5 years.
It was after I left the church, which is 5 years, within the last 5 years.
So it's, we're talking up until, 2015 or something. They are still having women beholding to their husband, who then has the relationship with God. So not a great dynamic like you described.
Yeah. I love that they've changed that. It needed to be changed. I don't think that it removes the problem, though, because, for multiple reasons. You still have generations of people that made a different covenant. No one's come out and explained, hey, we've changed in the temple. Those of you that made a different covenant, you're not held to that one. You're only held to the new one. No one, when they made those changes, they also came out and said, don't talk about these changes. No one talk about it. Let's keep it secret. Let's keep it, quote unquote, sacred. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be explained why this change was made, what it really means. The fact that they keep everything vague, I think is one of the big problems in the church, because you can always come back later and guess what? You can redefine it because it was too vague.
Yeah, and that's what we see in a lot of cases is they don't want to make a commitment as to what something means. And my understanding is when they changed it, and I haven't been, so this is I think I'd heard someone say that the women now don't covenant, they covenant to follow God through the new and everlasting covenant or something like that. But the new and everlasting covenant is marriage. So therefore, in a roundabout way, you're still covenanting to your husband. You're just doing it, through they're calling it the new and everlasting covenant, I believe is what they've changed it to. So
new packaging, that
yes.
same concept. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same dysfunction, new packaging. I like it.
So immediately after, the change, and I'm guessing, you married young, as we're all advised to in the LDS church. Did you start having kids right away? And obviously that plays into it a bit, because once you start having the children, now you've got, not only is it you that is affected, but you've got children that makes it a lot harder to make any kind of a change, or to stop, not be with your husband or whatever when you've got the children involved as well.
Yes. I mean, we took that seriously. I took that very literally. We started having children quite quickly, and we had probably as many children as we possibly could during our marriage. We had several kids, more than the average person my age. Oh gosh, I forgot like one of the most important parts of the story. So back up just a little bit. When we were dating, he would frequently talk about having like prophetic dreams and visions, and gosh, there's just so much. But one of the things that he shared with me was that his patriarchal blessing revealed to him that he was going to have multiple wives, and he didn't mean polygamy. He just meant that he knew through a dream that his first wife was going to die, and he was going to have like another wife, that God was already preparing for him, his second wife, to step in and take over when his first wife died.
And this was before you were his first wife. However, he was going to ask you to be his first wife with the knowledge that if you marry him, that means your fate is sealed, basically. And I'm thinking maybe as a convert, you just thought, okay, prophetic visions, inspiration. Did you just accept that? That's such an interesting dynamic.
It's definitely something that you think about and you ponder, and you're already in the middle of a relationship with someone that you really, really like, and you're falling in love with, and you believe is a righteous person. So you think, okay, they're not going to lie to me about this. This is something they truly believe. And, what do I think about this? Well, Joseph Smith had visions and prophecies, and we're taught that we can have our own personal revelation. That's what we're taught, that our patriarchal blessings are like directly from God. Little did I know until later that what he interpreted in his patriarchal blessing as being told he was going to have multiple wives was really just a typo. All it was a sentence that said, you will marry. Basically, it was, you could tell it was supposed to say something along the lines, you will marry a righteous woman, but instead it said you will marry a righteous women. And so he had taken this typo to mean that it really was meant to say women. But I didn't.
God
I
doesn't
didn't.
make typos.
Yes,
Oh
exactly.
my goodness. So, and that
But I
again, right
didn't
there.
know that.
Yeah, you didn't know that. And that's like that whole interpreting and just reading so carefully and trying to read every hidden meaning and looking for signs. I know so many people that do that and encouraged to do that. When you say, Landon, with their patriarchal blessings, just looking for that hidden meaning and looking for direction to the point where there's a typo that literally changes the course of your life and the person that you marry's life.
Yeah, that's absolutely
incredible.
the danger of those
Yeah.
blessings is that
Mhm.
when you believe in them, you look for every sign and you look for
Mhm.
every interpretation that it could be, and then you begin to act and you follow something that
Mhm.
really is no different than you know uh, a palm reader telling you something. You know, it's someone trying to tell your future by some power, and then you
Yep.
you try to read into it, and that can become very dangerous. But like you say, all of us were taught that these are
All of us were taught.
you know, a roadmap for your life, and that if you're righteous, they will come true, and that these things will happen in your life. And so, you know, you're a new member, and those of us that were that spent our life in, we all looked at those blessings and said, you know, what does this mean for my life, and how do I, you know, use this as a roadmap? So I can
Yeah.
certainly see why you would, you know, take that and say, oh, that, you know, I can, you know, I believe because he's telling me this is his blessing, that
Right.
this is a possibility.
Well, I think as a culture,
Yeah.
we believe patriarchal blessings. We just do. When I had a seminary teacher who said, here, I want to show you all my blessing. I'm one of the prophets that will lay dead in the street in Jerusalem in the second coming. And boy, we were all really impressed with this man. I don't know if he's done that yet or if he will. He's probably in his 80s now. But, you know, we all believe blessings. In my patriarchal blessing, it says that I will comfort people who have lost their spouses. Okay. So I shared that with someone who was a friend, and she said, I don't think we can hang out anymore because my husband has health problems. She took that so literally that because we were friends, it might mean what was in my blessing meant that her husband might die because we were friends, and we became more infrequent friends from that. So I think as a culture, we all give a lot of gravitas to a patriarchal blessing just as a whole.
Yes. Yes, like mine literally says that this is your personal scripture directly from Heavenly Father to you. And I default to literal setting. My baseline is think of things very literally. I have got a mathematical mind. 1 and 1 equals 2. There's no other answer. Like, and so it takes someone like that. I know there's lots of people that can take things with a grain of salt. Especially at that age and maturity level, was not. I was very literal thinker, and if that's what it's taught, then that's what it means. So I had to, I had to wrestle with that a little bit when we were dating. And what does that mean for me? If this relationship progresses, does that mean that this is my future? And ultimately, I just decided that it wasn't something that I needed to worry about, that if that was God's plan, that was God's plan. And, we'll deal with that when that comes. So, and why wouldn't I want my husband to have, comfort in another wife if ever I did pass? So that's kind of where I put it and settled on it. And I didn't let it bother me after that. But it's super funny that you say that, I never knew there were so many men that were going to die in the streets as a prophet, because
Yeah, a lot.
There's only supposed to be 3.
I thought there were only 2, because that was another thing that my husband thought that he was, through a prophetic dream. He thought he was going to be one of these prophets to usher in the second coming and to die in the streets of Israel. And, he has not done that yet. So I never knew so many people thought that of themselves. I think that's crazy.
Yeah. No, it's main character syndrome. And a lot of people have it. A lot of people raised in the church have it. Just everything revolves, and you want to feel special. Look at the recent story of the Doomsday family, where they believe that their 16-year-old son was the Davidic servant, somebody else who's going to usher in the second kingdom. You feel special, you want to feel special, you want to be connected to a special family, and you feel important in doing God's work. And it's just a phenomenon.
I did. Yeah. And when he told me that, I just, it's again one of those things. I felt like, oh, he's the authority. He's the one having the dream, not me. I didn't have any confirmation of that, yes or no. But it definitely makes you feel like, oh, if I'm connected to this person, that also makes me special, if that's true. Yeah. So it adds there's a little bit of that stroking your ego with it as well,
Yeah, well, you're a part of it. And I think, again, with Tim Ballard, he was telling women, I've had a vision. Nephi has told me, you're supposed to be with me. You're supposed to be helping me. So you do feel very important, and you feel there's some kind of prophetic element to it, that you're a part of this big picture, which is important.
Man, they should have a reunion. All these people that feel that of themselves, we should get them all together in one room. That would be pretty amazing.
I don't know if there's enough room in one room for all those egos, but it sure is. I'd be interested in the comments. If any of you know of anyone, or you yourself were promised that you might be one of the prophets that is going to lay dead in the street, because I feel like there were a lot of patriarchs at a certain age or era that were telling people this. So I don't know.
Man, every single one of them would be the keynote speaker. It'd be amazing.
I don't think we want them all in the same place, because that could usher in the second coming. If
it could open a portal.
Yes, did something to the building or something.
Exactly. But then think about if you believe it. Like my seminary teacher, he was in his 30s when he told us this. I was 14. I mean, he must have had that in the back of his mind the entire time. Like, someday my fate is a gruesome death, and in order to have that happen, the whole world is going to have to go to hell. I mean, he must have had a really apocalyptic view his entire life and how he lived his life, and it informed every single decision and everything that he did. So just because of a piece of paper, a typo, maybe, a misunderstanding, a misreading.
I think that's really important to realize. It's taken me many years to start to view my ex in a more charitable light, because of, my experiences were pretty traumatic. But I think in more recent years, as I begin to understand like mental health issues and how these beliefs affect us, I think you're right. You're spot on. I think it was a very, very heavy weight for him, feeling like this was his responsibility. This was something he was supposed to do. And how do you live up to that? I think it really wore on him very much. And so in that respect, I feel bad. I feel bad for him.
Yeah, well, it's good you can arrive at that point, because that is hard sometimes when you've lived through something, to look at the other person with empathy and more understanding. So then just tell us what your married life was like. Tell us about some of these experiences. I think we now kind of understand a little bit about your husband, what he was like, and you're having a bunch of children, and what was it like? What was happening?
One of the things he was really good at is, early on in the marriage was setting himself up as this authority and the authority. He seemed to know things, or we would have experiences and a conversation or just sometimes just weird random things that would happen, and he'd have a twist on it, like an interpretation of it that was spiritual, something that I wouldn't think of. And it always kind of kept me thinking, oh, I'm not spiritual enough to see that for what it is. I have to have him explain what that really meant. Or sometimes he'd have someone who was even another authority, like, confirm these things. And so there was one situation, experience we had that I think probably illustrates that really well. I was pregnant with our first child, and there was a lightning storm in our city that night, and we were awoken by a loud crash. And what had happened was there was a tree in our apartment complex that had been struck by lightning. So it was very, very, very loud and very bright. And so I was woken in the middle of the night, just bright, bright, bright flash, loud crash of thunder. And my husband was standing over me. He jumped out of bed and he'd raised his arm to the square and he was yelling as loud as he could, in the name of Jesus Christ, Satan, depart, just over and over and over.
Oh.
And at the same time, I guess because of the electrical surge, the fire alarm in our complex went off. And so it too was just loud and blaring. So all these things are happening to me, just this sensory overload. I'm quite pregnant and I've just woken up with all this all at once. And it was completely disorienting, terrifying. We could not turn our alarm off because it was completely fried. And so we had to leave our apartment in the middle of the night. And I didn't know what was going on. It just was insane, and it was just scary. But my husband drove us to our bishop's house that night. In the middle of the night, we woke the bishop up, and he asked the bishop to give us blessings. And first, he primed the bishop. He told the bishop what had happened, and he told the bishop that he felt like Satan was after an unborn child, and that this to him, it wasn't a lightning strike outside. It was Satan coming after us. And he pointed out that, as we were leaving our apartment complex, he kind of pointed out, look, no one else is outside wondering what happened. No one else heard this. We're the only ones that experienced this. And it was true. Like, no one else was out there looking around and wondering what happened, and probably because they just all went back to sleep because they didn't have someone yelling for Satan to depart at them. But
I'm sorry, I'm not
I don't
laughing,
know.
but oh my goodness. No, that's total main character syndrome right there. You are the only one. You're so important and your child's so important that
Yes.
Satan is after you.
Yes.
So I'm so curious about this bishop, because it would seem to me that the bishop would want to calm you guys down then at that point and say, probably wasn't that, cooler heads. Did he do this, or did he kind of play into it?
No, like the bishop gave me a blessing about, that Satan was after our unborn child, but had been, thwarted by the priesthood in our home. I think he instructed us to go home and rededicate our home. It was just terrifying. And, in hindsight, this is the same bishop that my ex was serving with in the bishopric. So there was a tightness there. There was something. So I think that, I don't know. I just don't know. It could have been done a lot better, but no, it definitely fed in. And those kind of things happened all the time. There always seemed to be someone that was in a way testifying of my ex's truthfulness, of his divinity in a way. And,
and you're vulnerable because you're a convert. So you know something, but you don't know everything. And so you're probably almost a little awestruck about the idea of priesthood and, otherworldliness, that you weren't aware of before. So I can totally see that, how you're in no position to be able to stand up and say, okay, honey, no way. Come on. You can't do that. And I again compare that to Tim Ballard, the same kind of thing. When you're such an authority figure and you know so much more, and that power differential, the other person is completely helpless. There's nothing that you could have done. And especially other authorities, again, like Tim Ballard, other people in his organization saying, listen to him, he knows. You're defenseless in that situation.
Yeah. And to be truthful, even if I had pushed back and said, I don't think that that's what it was, then he'd already set up the dynamic for the emotional abuse. Yeah. And so if ever I pushed back on something, it was shut down very quickly and in a very cruel way. And so you learn very quickly to just to be quiet, to go along, to move along. And it's unfortunate. I lost my train of thought.
We were at the lightning strike and you're pregnant and the trauma of this, I can't even imagine. Oh my goodness.
Well, to add to that, he believes that I'm going to die. an untimely young death. And so the whole time, the whole pregnancy, it was talked about a lot. He talked about it all the time. And so here this thing happens with the lightning and Satan attacking us. And it definitely leads into that. Well, it almost happened, And I'm wondering the whole time if I'm even going to survive childbirth. It was quite terrifying.
No, and I can see that. That would be a logical conclusion. Okay, she's a young, healthy person, but I know she's going to die. It must be giving birth to our child. So how terrifying. Right. I am so sorry that that is what your pregnancy was like. That's just horrifying to me.
Everything went well though. I had an easy childbirth, a beautiful baby, and then another one shortly after, and then another one shortly after, and then another one shortly after.
And you're not dying. What's your husband thinking?
I'm not dying.
Is he checking his blessing going, wait a minute.
Those years of having the children, after that first year, after I survived the first one, I think we settled into a little more normalcy. It was never super happy. There was always a bit of the emotional abuse there. There was always the authority. But the talk about my demise stopped. Like it just fell by the wayside, and I was happy to let that go. We just didn't discuss it. And I began to think as years went on, that was kind of just a silly belief, and we can just let that go and chalk that up to immaturity and being silly, and we don't have to talk about that anymore. So we just moved on, and it was all right. It was livable. And then it wasn't. and then things changed again. I don't know. Sorry.
There's so much to the story. No, there's so much to the story. And we should tell our viewers, we've emailed back and forth. We've had, prep calls, and there is just so much to the story. And we definitely want to tell it in a certain way, a very respectful way, with still understanding, some of the details and getting the point across. So we appreciate you, Autumn, just, trying to, figure out a way in your head to make sure that, we understand the main points, without going into things that aren't necessary. So take your time.
Yeah. So, just if we can pause for a second and just let it be known that, none of this is meant to be. Like, I don't want to embarrass my ex. I don't want to embarrass anyone that was involved in this. And I definitely want to be sensitive and to my children, because they didn't ask for any of this. So I'm going to be vague about some of the details, but I think it's just really important, because I don't think I'm the only one that has experienced these things. And if I had known at the time that I wasn't alone, it probably would have made a big difference.
No, we appreciate what you're saying, Autumn, and we completely understand. So just whatever you're comfortable with, just go ahead with that. And whatever you're not comfortable with, we can just move past that. So whatever you feel good about talking about.
So when I was pregnant with our last child, all this stuff about me dying resurfaced in a really awful way. My husband came to me one night. I was I don't know, probably like 7 months pregnant, I think. And I was half asleep already. He'd gotten home really late, and he came home, and he was just he came in, and he knelt down by my side of the bed, and he just had this, he was so happy. He was just aglow with just this happiness. And I'm waking up, I'm a little confused. I don't know what's happening. He's like, I've got to tell you something. And so he proceeds to tell me that that God had revealed to him who his next wife was going to be, and that she was a young girl that was one of our employees at one of our businesses that we had. And I mean, it was just devastating to me. And also confusing to me, because some years before he'd also told me that he already knew who it was, but that wasn't possible if this girl that he's now claiming what it was. But anyways, and then he just went over to his side of the bed and laid down and went right to sleep like a baby, and I was left to deal with that information. And I remember just getting up out of bed and walking and pacing the living room the whole night. I could not sleep. I could not rest. I could not get my mind off of what that meant. You know, here I am pregnant again, and now this person is revealed very specifically who's going to be my replacement, and she's, I mean, in close proximity. What does this mean? What am I dying soon? Like, what in the world does this mean? I just really didn't know what to do with that information. So things, I don't know, things are murky because it was so long ago, and it was so intense. But that kind of started a whole year, almost a year exactly to the day, of just really, really intense emotional and religious abuse. And it's, you know, some of these things that we read about in the Tim Ballard story really, really stand out. So it progresses and it progresses slowly, because at first it's like, well, what do we do with this information? Okay, so we know who it is, like, big deal, you know. But then it starts to be, well, he says, no, God's revealed this because he wants us to act on it. He wants us to be prepared. And so slowly, just step by step, it became my job was to facilitate a relationship between her and my children, so that my children would accept her and recognize her as their mom, and make it an easier transition for when I die. And so the way I was supposed to do this, I mean, I changed constantly. Some of in the earlier weeks and months, it was just she comes over for family home evening. You know, she's there. She's someone that the children recognize and know. Then it became she's our go-to babysitter. Anytime we go anywhere, she's the babysitter. We ended up taking a trip for our anniversary, which we'd never done before. We took like a long distance trip and left the kids behind, and they stayed with her. And their grandma was pretty upset about that.
Did she understand her role in this situation?
She did. I don't want to speak for her, because
right, of course
I
not.
don't know everything that she understood, but
right. And she was rather young, it sounds like, rather young. So
yeah, so
hard to say then.
I don't think I knew at that time how young she was, because she was an employee for us, and he had placed her, you know, similar to Tim Ballard. I think he'd placed her in a position in the company, basically over one of our companies, like the top person. And she was 17 years old. She had no training or business, like running a business. She there was no reason to have her in that position. And I think that's why I didn't quite know at first how young she was. You're not. She must have graduated early or homeschooled or something. She didn't turn 18 until after my last child was born. But I did.
It's so similar to the couple's ruse, to the ruse, don't you think, Landon? Just the manipulation of dynamics within couples and the power structure. It is so similar.
Well, it was for the kids. That's why this woman was there, was to take care of the kids when, your demise happened, as he put it. So, of course, who doesn't want to take care of their kids and make sure they're going to be taken care of?
Yes, and that's one of the things I think too in the Tim Ballard stories you hear. What aren't you willing? Like, how far are you willing to go to save the children? And in my, personal struggles, I spent probably a year on my knees, trying to get myself to a place where I'd be at peace. And there were, brief moments of peace where I could convince myself, okay, well, of course I want my children to be okay. Of course I want them to have an easy transition. Of course I wouldn't want this to be traumatic on them. So of course I'm gonna do what it takes, even though everything inside me is screaming that this is not right. This is awful, just awful. And the couples ruse thing is also very similar, except for I think in our situation it was a friend's ruse. The way that he got around having her, like, it brought notice to friends and family that she was at every family function. She was at every one of the kids' birthdays. She was there. She was there at my own mother's funeral, which made me furious. She was always there. And the way that he explained it was, oh, this is Autumn's friend. They're just really close. They just really like each other. He wanted us to go and do things together. Like, he wanted us to go take an institute class together. I think mainly just so that people would see us together and it would make sense to them why she's around all the time. It makes sense when I was dead that she would, it's okay because she was Autumn's friend. She was there. Yeah, she was there at the birth of my child. He brought her there and took the baby out of my arms and placed the baby in hers. It was just cruel. It was just cruel.
I really almost don't have any words at this point, and I think our viewers and listeners are going to feel that way too. And it just illustrates this level of grooming and manipulation, especially when there's that spiritual component, that you just can't even fathom the end result that we're hearing right now.
And I think one of the most difficult things was I didn't feel empowered to, at least especially early on in that year, I would say things like, well, this doesn't feel right to me. This, I'm praying and I'm not getting this revelation. I know that you say you have, and I know that she says she has, but where am I in this? I don't have this. And he would call her a prophetess. Well, she's a prophetess. And I'd be like, well, what does that make me? Well, you're not a prophetess, so you're not going to get that. Like I was just relegated to some lower level, that I wasn't spiritual enough. I wasn't righteous enough to get the same revelations that they were getting. And so then I wanted to go get counsel from our bishop or from our stake president, and that was absolutely forbidden, because my covenant was with him. My covenant in the temple was that I follow my husband, not the bishop. he set himself up as the ultimate authority over me. And that if I went and counseled a bishop on something that he had already received, then that was going to be my demise. That was me breaking my covenant. And also kind of similar to, I think there were things that came out in the Tim Ballard story where he said, other people aren't going to understand. I've got the Spirit and this is what it's telling me to do, but other people don't have the Spirit with them enough. They're not going to understand. And that was a lot of it too. Other people aren't going to understand what's happening here. This is of God. This is a higher law,
which just isolates you, completely isolates
Absolutely.
you, because who can you talk to? No one, not your, religious counsel, not a friend, not family. You're completely isolated by that train of thought.
Absolutely. I could not talk to anyone. And I literally spent hours on my knees just begging God to tell me something, give me something. I distinctly remember with my, I had this newborn baby and my older kids had gone off to school. And I remember laying on the living room floor with my baby right next to me and just crying and just trying to will myself to die. Like I wasn't suicidal. I didn't want to make it happen, but I wanted to cease to exist. I just wished God would do it sooner rather than later because it just felt so cruel. Like, why am I still around? Why do I have to sit here and witness this? It felt like I was watching my husband court someone right in front of me in my very own living room. I did have every now and then I'd have kind of just a moment of where I thought, oh, God's on my side. Like, and so this is kind of funny, but it's dark. I don't know. So when her birthday came around, my husband wanted me to throw her a birthday party. So it was kind of thrown on me really fast that I had to put together a birthday party really fast in one day. And so he was going to bring her home after work, and we were going to have a little birthday party for her at our house with our kids. So she came and had a cake for her, and as she blew out the candles, she leaned over and her hair caught on fire. And it was kind of this quick rush of, hurry, put it out. We got a towel and put it out, but her hair got singed. And inside, I was laughing and I thought, God loves me. Like these small little things, that, and I know that's just dumb, but like that was, and awful, but it was this moment of, oh, thank goodness.
Right. Somebody understands that you might be feeling these feelings of jealousy and confusion. And here's just a little sign. I get that. Your brain is trying to make sense of everything that's happening. So, oh my gosh, this situation, but again, every parallel that I can think of, because here you have Catherine Ballard and her husband is courting, or at least going through motions of some of those actions with other women, and it's all for the good of the higher purpose. And it's your problem if you have a problem with it, because everyone else knows better.
Absolutely. I mean, all along it was always put to me that like I did not believe that there was any sort of sexual relationship happening between them. It seemed like they were always around me. She was always coming over. Like the time together was also included me. And so I just felt like I didn't really want to believe. I don't think that there was any inappropriate relationships going on. But as the year progressed, some additional things started to occur. It became very, very clear to me that that he and she were fighting a lot, and that the fact that I had not died yet was putting a strain on their relationship.
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. It's just so
It's
incredible.
ridiculous.
Yeah. How dare you not pass away, Autumn? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what needs to happen. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, she must have
You know,
been
I have
second guessing, she's in, hanging around waiting for this and it's
Right.
not happening. And yeah, I can see
Right.
what
Her
that
life is in limbo too, because she's in this threesome relationship because she's going to, take your role. Yeah, that totally
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. And I specifically recall, and I thought it was so ridiculous that, she wasn't dating anyone. And I think that was, I think that was him putting that on her, but maybe that was her. I don't know. She wasn't dating anyone. Her clothing changed. Like she started to dress as though she had garments and she had not been endowed. She started to wear a wedding ring, which she claimed was a gift from someone else, that she because she didn't want to date anyone, and so she put this ring on her wedding ring finger so that guys would think she was taken, so she wouldn't be asked out. I didn't know at the time that he'd given her that ring, that was bought. I don't know if they had like an engage. I don't know. But oh gosh, another part of the story. So when I saw her, so that happened on her birthday too. I noticed this ring she had on her ring finger, and I asked her about it, and she said, someone gave it to her for her birthday, and she just wanted to wear it on her ring finger. And so I thought to myself, I didn't know it was from him, but I thought to myself, if she's gonna wear something on her ring finger, I want it to remind her of me. Not of, I don't want her to think of my husband. And so I gave her one of my rings, and I said, well, then wear this instead. And I think I don't know if that was a stroke of genius or stupidity. I don't know. But I eventually got that ring back, but I think it made both of them feel just horrific. Like, we can't even have this symbol between us without her. She's going to insert herself. And so I don't know. But anyway, I think I wasn't dying soon enough, and it was really putting a strain on. And so my husband started to really, really, he started to talk a lot about Abraham, and that he kept saying to me that he felt like he was Abraham, that he felt like he was being asked by God to sacrifice his family. And I just could not wrap my mind around it. He said it so many times, and it started to really bother me because I didn't see the connection. I thought, well, no one's asking you to do anything in your family, your whole family. Like, as far as I know, it's just me that's supposed to die. Like you're the one that's got everything waiting in the wings for you as soon as I croak. So like I did not get it. But I definitely started to worry and wonder if he was considering that, if he started to maybe believe that God was truly asking him to carry out something to make that go faster. So it was concerning. It came to be a very scary time in my life.
No, and I can understand that, because you're not wrong to have those thoughts when somebody's in that kind of an illusion and living it. They kind of do turn to those examples, like perhaps, Nephi killing Laban. Something has to happen for the good of everything else. And Abraham, of course, has a very specific sacrificial element to it. And it reminds me, in my own neighborhood years ago, people may remember Dr. Martin McNeil, who, to me, this story is extremely similar. He had a woman that he wanted to be with that was supposed to be his wife. His existing wife was still living, and he actually was finally, convicted and arrested for drowning her in a bathtub after she had had a surgery and was on drugs. It was a very awful situation that happened just a mile from me in our ward boundaries. But it was a similar thing where as soon as the wife had passed away, within a day or two, this other woman was moved into the home to be with the children, to make the transition easier. I can't even believe there's more than one situation like this, but the parallels to me are really setting off alarm bells in my head. So I don't think that you're off in imagining things like that in that kind of just supercharged scenario. What do you think, Landon? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen it quite a few times in the last couple of years where LDS men have done something to try to end the life of their wife so that they can do that. So
the Lori Vallow, Chad
very
Daybell
concerning.
situation.
I think it's a real concern, especially when he's got all these plans and nothing's happening.
Right. And you're the only thing in the way. So did you start then at that point just going, okay, now I sense I'm really in danger. Now I need to make a move? I mean, did that kind of enter did it kind of snap you out of it a little bit? Or what were your thoughts on that?
Definitely. It took a few more months. Things just ramped up, really just high stress. I remember at one point just getting in my car and just driving and just wanting to get away. And I couldn't, because I couldn't leave my kids behind. I got I got to the state line and turned around and came back. I got pretty desperate. I went one day. I really just could not handle it. I was at my absolute breaking point, and I called my stake president, and he left his job and drove over, and he brought his wife with him, and he sat in my home with me while I paced and tried to explain what was going on. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified, because here I was breaking this, cardinal rule of seeking an authority over and above my husband. And I told my stake president, I was like, you cannot tell him that I've talked to you. Please do not tell him. And he said, well, he didn't give me any sort of counsel. Like, he could have so easily right then and there said, no, this is not right. This is not good. This is bad. Here, let's get you out. This is a bad situation. Instead, it was, well, I need to talk to your husband. And so finally, I relented. I said, okay, go ahead and call him in. And so, my husband.
Did you tell him about the other woman in your life?
Yes.
You told
him
state
everything.
President and his wife sitting there that there was this other woman with you, and both of them did not jump up right now and say, I need to take you and your kids probably somewhere else. Nobody did that. Okay.
No. And so, but he convinced me to give her permission to call my husband in. He called my husband in, talked to my husband. My husband came home just mad as hell. Like, that was a bad day. But my state president never talked to me again until after I left. And he did tell me, like, after I finally, left my husband and I was in a safe place, he did tell me that he was concerned, that he didn't want to counsel me in a way that might endanger me. But I thought, well, leaving me there without any counsel at all endangered me. And I also found out, like, in preparation for talking to you guys, I went back through my records and things, and I actually I had a good friend of mine that worked that we were actually in business with at the time, and he had been seeing some things happen at work during all this period of time, and he was an avid journal keeper. And so after I left, he gave me he was so kind to give me some copies of a chunk of his journal so that I could kind of see and just have some documentation. And there was a conversation that he'd had recorded in his journal that he'd had with my ex, where my ex explained to him that the stake president had already told him that none of his revelations were true, that none of this was right, and that if he persisted in it, he could get excommunicated. And I read that and I thought, well, that would have been really good information for you to tell me. Like why could he be that definitive and strong with my ex, but he wasn't willing to take, like, with me, it was like, well, I need to talk to your husband. I couldn't have that information.
Yeah.
It's just mind numbing.
It is. And I think it speaks to lay clergy with absolutely no knowledge or understanding of the kind of help that people need. They have no business even being in a position where they could offer counsel like that. Although, as a human being, you would think that you could tell that story to someone on the street and that person might have some better advice or help than what you received, from your stake president, I would think, because any person would say, this is not right.
Did they ever ask or invite you to go to LDS Social Services and have counseling, or to go through marriage counseling or anything like that as part of this? Or
before I left?
Yes.
Yeah. No. Nothing like that. And, to be fair, I mean, we could also say, well, do you really need someone to tell you?
Like in this situation, no. I think
right?
the counseling session would be 5 minutes. They would say, please remove yourself from this scenario. So, oh my goodness.
Right. But you have those covenants that are sitting there.
Yes.
And for me, if I left my husband, if I broke that temple eternal marriage covenant, that too was eternal damnation.
Yeah.
You've got to keep that at all costs. There's nothing in the church that tells you, you know what, divorce is okay in some situations. I do think that they've loosened up on that sense, but at that time that's not the case.
Right.
It took me a while to get there.
I think we should point out here, because we did talk a little bit about your background. You are an educated person. You highly educated, professional career. And so this just shows that it's not your intelligence level. It's more of an emotional response than an intelligence response, that you're committed to your husband, you're committed to your church, you're committed to your children. And so you continue down the path because you're so committed to these different ideals, and emotionally you can't understand the emotion, and you're trying to do what you've covenanted to do and do what you're supposed to do, even though your mind in the back of your head might be saying, warning bells saying, oh, you need to get out of this. Your emotions are saying, this is the people I love, this is the place that I'm supposed to be, God is with me. And I've talked to the bishop, I've talked to the stake president. They haven't counseled me to believe. And so you can very easily see where step by step you're into this, and you're pulled in, and you don't know how to get out.
And I would think of the words of Tim Ballard. Don't you want to do what it takes? Can't you do what it takes? He would say that to the women, and they'd say, of course I can. You were doing what it took. I mean, despite all that mental anguish, and reaching out periodically for help. But bottom line, keep the covenants, and you had to do what it took.
And sometimes in some circles, it feels like the greater the sacrifice, the greater the reward, right? The greater the sacrifice, the more righteous you are.
Yep.
And I think it shows, I think that anyone can be groomed. I know that there's going to be people out there that are thinking to themselves, are you really going to blame the church for some, something your ex did to you? And the answer is yes and no. I blame certain principles that the church teaches and continues to foster for the role that played in my own grooming and my own abuse. I'm not a stupid person. I wasn't highly educated at the time. I was young. I was naive. I was a very literalistic thinker, and I was immature in a lot of ways. But I was never stupid. But you can be groomed. And I think one of the most pernicious beliefs or teachings in the church is this idea of that there's an authority over you more than yourself, to defer your own decisions to someone else. And there are going to be people in the church that say, well, that's not what's taught, but it is. I mean, even as recent as this last general conference, we are taught by the prophet himself, think celestial. And maybe you don't think that that's what that means, but it is vague enough that is what that means, or at least that is what it can mean and could mean and will mean down the road. They don't define exactly what they're expecting you to do to think celestial, but guaranteed down the road, whenever it comes to doing something according to your own conscience or doing something that the prophet's telling you, guess what thinking celestial is going to mean? Right?
And you brought up a point there that I hadn't thought of, because when we talked, you're right. You did say that you went back to school after you were a single mother. Were you in the home as a mother, stay-at-home mom during this time?
Yes, for the most part. I had a small role in the businesses, mostly like on the accounting side. But yeah, but I by and large was a stay-at-home mom until
So
then.
you were isolated.
Yes.
It was your husband and it was your kids and it was your church community. When you're working, you're out with other people who are not the same faith, who might advise you in that, but in this case, you're very much isolated. And I think that was another tactic that we saw was isolation, or getting you where you couldn't get advice from other people.
Because everyone had the same
absolutely.
mindset. Everyone did have the same
Yeah.
mindset, and could understand what your husband was saying. Exactly.
And I was largely isolated from my own family as well, because his family was the more righteous family. Every holiday was spent with his family. We rarely ever went to visit my family or had visits from my family. It was a lot of isolation,
Which I think the
Yeah.
church is very good at. If you are a member of the church and your family is not, they're very good at trying to make sure, President Nelson said, don't take advice from those who don't believe the same way as you.
Yep.
So why do you want
Yeah.
them coming and taking your children somewhere? Because they might, inadvertently tell them something that's contrary to the gospel or something. And so that's very much the way the church, I see that dynamic a lot, where people who join the church then gravitate towards the family that's in the church and away from the ones that are out.
Yeah, it's a silo effect for sure, that you're just very siloed and contained. So I think we would now like to understand, how did you finally remove yourself or make a change to sort of get away from this situation or take your life back?
Yeah. So it wasn't until I began to have enough courage and understanding that, like, to give myself permission to be in charge of my own feelings and my own thoughts. And that really was the basis. Once I was able to regain and trust myself, that was the beginning of the end. I remember, this whole year, I'm down on my knees, I'm reading the scriptures, I'm going to the temple, I'm doing everything they tell you to do, looking for the answer, trying to get an answer from, that this is or isn't true, that I do or do not have to participate in this. And I went to church one day, and there was a talk about, what do they call it? Free agency, which I guess we don't have anymore, apparently. But
we have moral agency.
We have more agency now.
Yes.
But at the time, this talk on free agency was a really good good thing for me. And I sat there and listened to it, and the person talking talked about how it, and not that I ascribed to this, but at the time it was really helpful that if you're praying and you don't get an answer, then that could mean that God leaves it up to you to decide. That there's not a right or a wrong. You just get to decide. And I globbed onto that, and I was like, yes, because I couldn't get an answer, and that meant I could freely choose, and that saved me. And I remember going home, because my husband is as amazingly righteous as he is, because he's going to be a prophet. He actually hadn't gone to church with us. He stayed home. So I went home, and he's like, "Oh, how was church? Oh, good. What'd you learn?" I was like, "Well, I learned that if I don't get an answer, then I can choose. And I don't choose this." I said, "I'm not telling you what you can believe. You can believe whatever you want, but I'm not doing it. This girl's not going to be in our house. She's not who you think she is. I'm not going to die. I am moving on with my life. You can do whatever you want, but it's not going to be in this house." And I think it just floored him. He was just sort of speechless, because I don't know that I'd ever spoken to him that way before. And it took him probably a day to process. And the next day, he was very, very, very angry. That was a bad day. But in that moment, I think he did not know what to say. He didn't know what to do, because for the first time I was saying, no, this isn't how I choose to live. So the dynamic changed, and I mean, things kept going, but the visits from this girl stopped, and so their relationship was forced to continue outside of me. And then a month or two later, he came home from work, and he told me that she left, that she quit her job and she left. And I thought, yes. Because what I was praying for and hoping for was that I could just have my family back to normal. Let's just forget all this happened. Let's move on. Let's just, my husband's been confused this whole time. Let's just get back to normal. And the next day, I had an opportunity to talk to her briefly, and it didn't take long. In the conversation, she explained that she'd gone and talked to her bishop, and I think her bishop did a lot better job with her than my stake president had done with me, and explained to her that none of this was right, and she needed to get out of that situation. And so she had followed his counsel. But in that brief conversation, she did explain to me that the nature of their relationship was very different from what I had understood and believed it to be, that they had been sleeping together a lot during that year. They had been making plans. I think they had gone house shopping. They'd made wedding plans. Like there was a lot more going on than what I understood it to be. And that gave me a lot of courage too, because I thought, well, then my temple covenant's already broken. Like, to me, it was one of, I don't know, like, if you think to yourself, how would I react if I found out my spouse was cheating on me? I think most people would be absolutely devastated. But for me, I was free. It was the most freeing feeling. I thought, finally, I am released. I do not have to be here anymore. He already broke that covenant. I can no longer break it. I can go. And I left. I left within the hour. I took the kids and I left.
Wow, it was over. The ruse was over right there. And I would point anybody to, I don't know, hopefully a lot of you have been listening to RFM, read the statements from not only, the alleged victims of Tim Ballard, but the husband of the one alleged victim, because that husband, for anyone that says, how could you let this happen in your house? How could you not see? There's just a dynamic where, as the spouse, you give this leeway. You're hoping everyone will come to their senses. You're hoping the family can go back to normal. Like you said, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to confront. And you just go down this path until there's a moment like that where point of no return, and you just regain all your autonomy and your eyes open. And then you take action, which it sounds like you did within an hour, which is absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember, so when I had that conversation with her, it was actually over the phone, and I was with my ex down at our business office, and I was in his office with him. And when he realized that I was on the phone with her, he tried to make me get off the phone. I think he was very concerned about what I might hear, and obviously, and I just kind of held my hand up like, stop. And I listened for a couple minutes, and that's all I needed to know. And I got off the phone with her, and I remember this moment very clearly. I sat down on the other, like across the desk, his desk from him, and he sat on the other side, and I'd never seen him look so scared of me before. He just sat there waiting for me to talk. And I finally looked at him, and I said, this is so crazy. It's crazy what your brain does in a moment like this. I can't believe this was the first thing out of my mouth. But I said to him, don't you ever get mad at me for having a dirty house ever again.
You have no ground to stand on right there. Wow. And that's the first step to reclaiming your power. You said it right there.
As though that has anything to do with anything. But I guess in my brain, I was like, here you've been railing on me for all my imperfections while you're sitting here doing the most gross thing in the world to me, It just, I don't know. It's just so absurd. It's just absurd.
Wow. And so from that moment on, you reclaimed everything. I mean, I know it was a tough road, but now you're in a situation where you're very happy, as you've described to us. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your situation now, or just leave it at that you've moved on and have a positive life with positive relationships, and nobody else saying they're having revelations about you or prophecies or that you're going to die or anything like that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, I spent many years as a single parent because I was still in my 20s, and I had many children. Trying to date when you're that age with that many kids. I mean, there's just no 20-something-year-old man that's ready to take that on. That was that was a rough go. But so but I did eventually marry just a wonderful man. We've been together more than a decade now, and he lets me do whatever I want.
And that's the secret sauce, right? Right there.
It's a secret
Let everybody
sauce,
do whatever they want. Yep. Everybody consents, and you can have a beautiful relationship like that. Well, we appreciate you sharing your story. And I think maybe explain to us or to our viewers a little bit why, it was so important. What a step to reach out to us, I think, but listening to our podcasts, other podcasts about Tim Ballard, everything just resonated. What do you hope people can learn from your story, from you coming forward and just explaining in a little more detail how these things can happen to the alleged victims of Tim Ballard, to you? I mean, why, how did you get so brave? Because it is very brave for you to come on and talk about this.
I just felt it was time. And I think one of the things that really upsets me is that this kind of stuff is still going on. I've obviously moved on. It's been years and years and years. But it tore our family apart. And it devastated us, and there are still things that, raising kids in a split family, it takes its toll on everyone. It bothers me that these things are still happening. It bothers me that every few years in the news, we get some big thing come out and everyone's just shocked. Oh my gosh, how can this happen? And I'm sitting here thinking, I know exactly how this can happen, because it happens to more people than just the ones that we see on the news. This is happening to more people than just me. This is happening to individuals and families. And the church plays a big role in it. Yes, there's some bad actors. Yes, there are people that take the church's teachings and twist them and turn them for their own uses. But it also primes people and grooms good people who just want to be righteous, who just want to be good, who just want to do good things. It grooms them to not have autonomy, to not make decisions for themselves, to not use logic, to put a man or a church or a prophet in the place of God. The church, in many respects, usurps God, and they do it very slyly. I didn't know until I was in the temple and didn't have a way out that the final culminating covenant was not to give everything to God. It was, the term God was substituted by the term the church. It was to give everything to the church. And people may not think that that is an important distinction, but it is absolutely important. It is one of the worst, most dangerous teachings our church has, is that they equate the church with God. They equate the prophet with God. It's dangerous and it needs to stop. And I think I was inspired recently listening to Peter Bleakley. I need to meet that man. He's brilliant.
He's awesome. We would love to have him on the podcast. I've chatted back and forth with him on social media, and he's amazing. Everyone should watch everything he does.
But he said something on one of his podcasts about not giving criticisms without following it up with some solution or some suggestion of how to be better. And I think that that's very wise. And I think that, for a long time, I just thought, well, maybe if we can just get the church to come out and admit these things, or speak more clearly, or have more transparency, then things can get better. And I've really just given up on that. I think they're having a lot of wonderful success over there in Great Britain. I'm still just at a loss as to how. I think that's an absolute miracle. But I think really what I see we can make a difference is to take the power back. People can only have power over you that you let them have. So in many ways, I was complicit in my own abuse, in the ways that I would allow it, But we don't have to do that. Just because the church or the prophet says something and makes it sound like we have to do that, and that's what God wants us to do, we don't have to take it. We can take the power back. I feel like my identity as a Mormon, the religion I joined and loved, it was a part of my identity. I feel like that's been stolen from me. And I would love it if we could empower people to take that back. Just because you belong to the Mormon church and you're part of their culture does not mean that you have to do as you're told. It means you can be a good person and you can trust yourself to make those decisions. And I think maybe that's where the power is. Maybe that's where the change is. If someone's telling you that they have authority over you and it's going against your own judgment, I think you can take back that power.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson here. But again, as you say, that's difficult. I mean, I always talk about my own story where I never really was a believer. I was agnostic since a child. Why did I stay in the church for over 5 decades? people can't understand that. And the only way I can explain it is to say, I didn't know I could leave. I didn't know I could do anything different. I just went with the flow. I never understood that there was this power dynamic, that there was something I could reclaim, that there was something I could do autonomously. And, it was never horrible, but it was never anything I really wanted to do. And I never understood that you eventually, and that is what happened to me when I was about 55. I woke up one Sunday morning and said, I don't want to do it. I don't want to go. I don't want to go to my calling. And I texted the primary president. I was in the primary playing the piano. And I said, I'm just not going to be there anymore. And after taking that step, then there was another step and I gave myself permission. But boy, it took a long time because when you're raised in that structure, you don't understand that you don't have power or a limited power. So it's kind of an epiphany. And maybe some of our viewers and listeners won't understand what we're talking about. Maybe some will absolutely understand what we're talking about. But I really appreciate everything you're saying. What are your thoughts, Landon?
I'm not even going to try to follow that up.
Yeah.
The words that you've said, Autumn, and based on your experiences have just been overwhelming. You're so humble, so well spoken, and your story is just so overwhelming. I think a lot of people are just gonna love you and the things that you said and what you've had to go through to get there. So I just want to say thank you for coming on our show and thank you for reaching out to us and sharing this with us. I know it wasn't easy. We had to do a couple things to make sure, that you could tell this story without harming other people. It wasn't that you were really worried about yourself. You were worried about other people. And so just thank you for reaching out to us. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's just incredible. And we just think that you're so brave. And we think that everything you said, I think there's a lot of things you said that are going to resonate with people in different ways and so many lessons to take away from this. And like you said at the very beginning, if just one person needs to hear something like this, if one person listens to this and it does resonate and makes a difference in their relationships, in their dynamic of what they're doing, in their spiritual side, somehow makes a difference in themselves, then this is absolutely worth it. So I think this is one of the most powerful podcasts we've ever done. Don't you think, Landon?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we're all a little overwhelmed. I think we all need a nap now. That's kind of how I feel, right? Wow. Well, we certainly appreciate you, Autumn. This has been absolutely incredible. To our viewers and listeners, please comment. Let us know what you think of Autumn's story. Tell us if you've experienced, different levels of this. I think that's the other part of this, that there are some stories like this, and then there are, these different levels of this kind of situation that happen, and this kind of abuse of power and loss of power, this kind of finding power back. Share your own story with us. We would absolutely love to hear. Like and subscribe to Mormonish. And if you would like to be notified of when new episodes come out, you can hit the notification bell. If you would like to help financially support Mormonish podcasts, we always have links to how you can donate through PayPal and Venmo in our show notes. And again, we just thank Autumn so much. This has just been quite the incredible evening, and your story is going to touch so many people. I absolutely know that. So thank you again so much from Mormonish. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.